While Europe was fractured and struggling through the early Middle Ages, 9th century Baghdad was the undisputed intellectual capital of the planet. It was a sprawling, vibrant metropolis, alive with scholars, merchants, and monumental architecture. This city sat at the center of an empire that had overthrown the Umayyads in 750 CE. At its peak, the Abbasid Caliphate stretched across 3 continents, running unbroken from the shores of North Africa all the way to the borders of India. Looking at this Abbasid gold coin, you can see the physical proof of the empire's vast economy. By dominating these transcontinental borders, the Abbasids centralized global trade routes and poured staggering riches into their capital. Yet, by the winter of 1258, this highly advanced, seemingly invincible empire was burned to the ground, its population decimated, and its territories completely shattered. To understand how a society at the absolute peak of human advancement collapses so utterly, we have to look at the mechanisms that built it. The Abbasids relied on 3 foundational pillars to secure their rise, and every single one of them became a weapon of their destruction. Managing a transcontinental empire in the 8th century was a logistical nightmare. Without modern communication, collecting taxes and enforcing laws across thousands of miles of deserts and mountains was nearly impossible. The solution came from a brilliant Persian family known as the Barmakids. They completely reorganized the state, centralizing the government, modernizing the tax code, and replacing clumsy paper scrolls with an entirely new administrative tool, the bound financial ledger. As the Barmakids built this highly efficient bureaucracy, they accumulated immense authority in the court. This growing influence triggered deep political paranoia in Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who began to view his most competent administrators as a direct threat to his own rule. Rather than share authority, Harun al-Rashid ordered a violent purge. He stripped the Barmakid family of their titles, confiscated their wealth, and had them systematically executed or imprisoned. By destroying his own best administrators, the Caliph secured absolute short-term control, but he permanently hobbled the Abbasid bureaucracy. The empire lost the institutional memory and logistical efficiency required to manage its massive territories. With the civil bureaucracy weakened, the Caliphate desperately needed a loyal, elite military force to maintain order, one completely isolated from local political rivalries. They created the Mamluks. These were enslaved, non-Arab mercenaries, mostly of Turkic and Caucasian descent, who were purchased as youths, converted to Islam, and subjected to intense martial training to serve exclusively as the Caliph's royal guard. Caliph al-Mu'tasim went so far as to relocate the capital away from the unruly population of Baghdad to the isolated garrison city of Samarra, seen here with its iconic spiral minaret. He surrounded himself entirely with his Turkic guards. But surrounding yourself with a slave army comes with a distinct risk. By 861, the Turkic leadership realized they held the actual physical power in the capital. When they felt their interests were threatened, they simply assassinated Caliph al-Mutawakkil. His murder triggered the anarchy at Samarra. For the next decade, the enslaved mercenaries cycled through 4 different puppet caliphs, installing and executing them at will. The Abbasids' reliance on a mercenary army permanently shattered central authority. Unable to project power from the capital, outer regions of the empire broke away, forming independent, autonomous dynasties. Looking at this research on the Abbasid period, we can see that despite the total political fragmentation of the state, Baghdad remained an incredibly wealthy cultural jewel. Scholars from around the world gathered at the city's House of Wisdom, embarking on a massive movement to translate and preserve global knowledge. By synthesizing Greek philosophy with newly acquired papermaking technology, Arabic became the lingua franca of the intellectual world. Scholars translated ancient texts and built upon them, driving rapid advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. This illustration from a medieval manuscript proves the scholarly boom translated into active physical experimentation and cross-cultural scientific breakthroughs centuries ahead of their time. But this massive concentration of wealth and knowledge created a dangerous target. Politically weakened, stripped of its outer territories, and lacking a unified military, Baghdad became the ultimate geopolitical prize. In 1258, the Mongol armies of Hulagu Khan arrived at the city's gates. The brickwork of Baghdad's ancient walls, seen here, offered very little resistance. The Mongols sacked the unprepared city, slaughtering its residents and throwing its vast libraries into the Tigris River. Baghdad's cultural and intellectual brilliance masked a completely hollowed-out military and political core. When an external threat finally arrived, its destruction was inevitable. The 1258 siege definitively ended the 500-year Abbasid reign as a true political power. The Islamic world's epicenter shifted permanently away from Baghdad. However, a surviving member of the dynasty managed to flee to Cairo. There, the Abbasid name was kept alive for another 2.5 centuries. But these Cairo Abbasids were strictly ceremonial. They held lavish titles and performed state rituals, but they were entirely devoid of actual authority. The rulers actually pulling the strings in Cairo were the Mamluk Sultanate. The dynasty's final ceremonial descendants were living as puppets to the exact same slave-soldier caste their ancestors had created centuries prior. Accumulating vast wealth and commanding intellectual dominance cannot save a state if its internal institutions are rotting. When an empire builds its foundation on political paranoia, fractured loyalty, and mercenary power, it engineers its own collapse.